Welcome to another edition of the Plan Well podcast, hosted by owner and attorney of Cary Estate Planning, Paul Yokovitis.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Plan Well podcast. This is episode 12, and today we're talking to Alex Anderson with Anderson Legal in Cary. Alex, how are you today?
Good. How are you, Paul?
Good, thanks. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So you started your firm in what, 2019?
2019, probably early fall of 2019. Yeah.
That's right. Okay. And but you originally started, I guess, you were at Emory University for neuroscience and behavioral biology.
That's right. A very different world than the legal industry.
Right. And then from there, you took a gap year in Poland, which is where your family's from, before going to UNC Law School. Is that right? That's
correct. Yep.
Awesome. And now you find yourself as a solo lawyer, a lawpreneur, focusing on construction and litigation matters. You're married to your husband, Luke, who's an enterprise solutions consultant at Dude Solutions, and you have a 17-month-old son named Everett. Do you want to plug any gaps that I may have left?
I think you got it about right there. Yep.
Now, we were talking a little bit before we started recording about how you kind of came to where you're at. You start with a neuroscience and behavioral biology degree, and ultimately you get to basically small business and developer and construction litigation. Tell me about that trajectory from law school and how you sort of picked your path.
Yeah, so I picked neuroscience in college because I come, from a medical family. There's a lot of scientists, a lot of doctors in my family, and so that was kind of a natural choice for me. And so as I dove into neuroscience, I started to realize that the legal world, when it comes to enforcing the criminal codes, and the scientific world, as we understand human behavior and the human brain, are very much two different worlds. And I thought that the legal world could use some input from the scientific world as to how we should treat certain crimes. And so that was really what took me to law school afterwards. And in law school, I took another pivot because I interned for the public defender's office, and I interned for a local judge, and, realized that becoming a criminal defense attorney would be kind of a heavy job, and it just did not very much fit my personality. And so in law school, I was forced to kind of start navigating the civil side. And when I graduated in 2013, the legal market was not great at all. And really, you would take any job you would get because you would be lucky to get a job at the time. And I was lucky enough to get a position doing construction litigation out in Winston-Salem. And that started my trajectory into construction. And then eventually, as I changed positions, I picked up the commercial side representing businesses. And so my background is really representing very large international businesses. And, once I left the other law firms and started on my own, my focus became small local businesses, ranging from 1 employee to about 20 employees.
Got it. So you're working more with the companies that don't, from the outset in any given year, have a massive litigation budget. Litigation is something that maybe could be regular or is totally irregular, but they need an outsourced solution that's going to be unique to their needs.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. We were talking before we started recording. Your trajectory actually is really similar to mine. I got a criminal justice degree coming out of undergrad. And when I was in undergrad, I worked for a criminal defense firm in Grand Rapids that pretty much only did murder and sex crimes. So it was all just like heinous felonies, right?
Yeah, pretty heavy stuff.
Right. And in Michigan, we didn't have the death penalty. So it was pretty much, you tried a case through conviction or, not guilty. And then if they were convicted, you went through the appeal. So it was a lot of, very long-term representations. But so when I went to law school down here in Raleigh at Campbell, I wanted to see the other side of things. So I worked at the Wayne County DA's office in Goldsboro for my 1L summer. and realized just how incredibly lacking in justice the system actually is. Much more about efficiency, much more about clearing calendars and getting matters resolved, rather than actually doing justice, as opposed to like what you see in documentaries with, gladiator lawyers sort of representing the cause and doing the right thing. It was much more about just let's get through the day. And then I pivoted to civil and worked at a local firm that did sort of family and construction and creditors' rights and that kind of thing, and then ultimately landed on estate planning. So it's interesting because I feel like a lot of lawyers or a lot of law students come into law school thinking that they're going to do one thing and end up experiencing the realities of it and saying, well, this isn't really what I thought it was.
Exactly. And, a lot of times I get asked the question, well, why didn't you want to keep working at it and try and change the system, right? Well, I think in the United States, the system is so ingrained in its ways that honestly, being one person trying to change it, you're bound to fail. I know that's not an inspirational statement, but I think it's a true statement. So at some point you have to consider your own sanity.
Well, I think it misjudges the capacity of any individual lawyer too, is you're trying to, it's basically, okay, why didn't you try harder? Well, you can be the best lawyer on the face of the earth if you're still facing systemic issues or laws that just don't favor your outcome. It's just not going to happen. So it's much more of a legislative issue. It's much more of a personal implicit bias issue, much more so than any one individual lawyer, for sure.
Exactly.
I think anybody who has those criticisms doesn't really know how things work. Now, since you've been on your own, obviously you had 2019 was just like any other year, right? We had the courts were open. You could meet people in person. Have those face-to-face discussions if needed. But now in 2020, we're sort of in a different reality. How has that really changed or shaped your practice?
In the very beginning of the pandemic, the first few weeks, it was clear that my business was experiencing, that unknown that everybody was hit with. I had a couple new clients that had started out working with me, and some had to pull out because they just were not sure what's next, right? And one did unfortunately go under. So the first few weeks were troubling for my business, and being as new as we are, I started questioning, how is this really going to impact our ability to survive? And as the reopening approached, things really came back up. And I think that, the local economy and local businesses were sort of inspired, yes, we are reopening. Let's get back to doing things as usual. Mm-hmm. And so I think we're actually in better shape than we were, say, January of 2020. We really do have a decent amount of work to do right now. And I think one of the important things about COVID is when I first started the business, my intent was to start a virtual law firm and then grow it into the traditional brick and mortar law firm. And I think that COVID showed me that I really need to stick to my guns and keep going with the structure that I have, because I really did not need to adapt to COVID whatsoever. It was just business as usual. We have the infrastructure to be virtual, and perhaps we do still do in-person client meetings despite being virtual, and those have kind of died off with COVID. But I think that it was an eye-opening experience to understand that, yes, I'm on the right track, and perhaps there is no need to go into the traditional sense of a law firm.
Yeah, and I know that you probably will have some pleadings or affidavits, something like that need to be like notarized maybe. But other than that, you could send documents to clients for their review. You can go over things on Zoom, screen shares, those sort of things. In terms of the courts, has anything really changed? I know the filings were still a thing, but you probably weren't having hearings.
That's right. So all deadlines that were that fell during the shutdown were extended to June 1st. So that was helpful, and it really kind of took some pressure off. And, the courts were doing some limited hearings, mostly dealing with matters that were, I guess we could, in more of a vernacular term, consider an emergency, right? Some domestic violence issues, protective orders, and whatnot. So most of my cases were not going forward in court. In fact, none of them were actually going to hearing at the time. And so now the courts have reopened, and we do have in-person court, and we also have court via WebEx. The more substantive cases, the more substantive hearings are heard in person. And so, the courts have quite rigid rules as far as you really do have to stay 6 feet away, even if you arrive together. They have marked seats as to where you can and cannot sit. And when you're in court, you really do feel like, they have it under control, and they are taking the right precautions to protect the people that are there.
That's good. Yeah, I know statute of limitations, those sort of things were stayed too. Is that right? And discovery responses.
Yes. Any deadline that fell under that shutdown, and yes, that included statute of limitations. But you were still able to file and continue business if you so chose to. And so, in my cases, I took that added step, and I did in fact follow the regular scheduled deadlines, just to be sure, just because deadlines are sort of the be all end all of civil litigation. And so I wanted to make sure that we're doing right by the client.
Got it. No, that makes sense. So I know a lot of your clients are small business owners from sort of a lot of different industries, or potentially a lot of different industries. What are some general points that you see in your initial conversations or questions as they come up that are pretty common for your general small business clients when it comes to litigation?
I think that there's two main issues that small businesses deal with, especially once they come to my office. The first being the quality of their contracts. A lot of times the issue that they come in with would not be a problem had their contract been drafted in a manner that really anticipates any sorts of issues and protects them in the right way. I'm seeing a lot of contracts that were just pulled offline, perhaps a few versions combined together, and when you start a business, you certainly want to watch your costs, but a contract is not the place to do that. That's really the number one way to make sure that you are protected. And when you're new at your business, there's a lot of risks that you need to not be taking. So I highly encourage that all business owners, whenever they're dealing with contracts, whether it's their service contract for their clients that they're having their clients sign, or perhaps it's a vendor that's providing them services, all that should be reviewed by an attorney, because it will save you a lot of time and money down the road.
Right.
And then, dealing with small businesses and litigation, something that is a big problem for small businesses and is never a problem for the large corporations that have in-house departments with lawyers dealing with issues that come in, is what happens when you get sued. A green card arrives in the mail saying you have these documents to be picked up at the post office, or perhaps the sheriff shows up. And a lot of businesses just say, what's next? Put it off to the side and wait on it. Yeah. And then the next time that person's cleaning their desk, it's 3 months down the road, and you only have 30 days to answer your complaint. If you don't, then you lose by default because you didn't answer. And it can be kind of difficult to fix that. I mentioned earlier that deadlines are kind of the be-all, end-all of civil litigation. And that's a challenge for small businesses because they don't, mail arrives and it's taken by a person who might not understand what it is that they're looking at. Right. And so they're confused, and that puts the business at a significant risk. And unfortunately, it's a big risk for businesses that do good work and have never been sued because they just don't know how it works. So my suggestion to small businesses is to make your employees aware that, it's possible that we do get sued at some point. It's never happened to us before, but it's possible. When we do, that's a major risk. This is what you need to look for, and this is the process we're going to follow when this happens. This needs to be taken to the individual who's the decision maker, and then they need to reach out to a lawyer. So really being aware of an incoming lawsuit is very important when it comes to your risk management.
Yeah, that's great information. And so what types of cases, now that you've been established and your practice is growing, what sorts of claims or cases are you seeing as sort of your ideal case to work on?
So really disputes between businesses, which is a simple way of describing commercial litigation. There's a lot of, clients not being paid for their services is a very popular case in my office, or perhaps service contracts gone wrong. So for example, there's a property management company that hires a cleaning crew or a cleaning company to clean their properties, and the cleaning company is just not performing to their contract. And so that's an issue that we can handle. There's also commercial leasing is another big one. What's unique about commercial leasing is that unlike residential leasing, there is not much statutory law to dictate what happens between a commercial landlord and a commercial tenant. And that's all under the contract. And so a lot of people don't understand that. They think that, my landlord has to do certain things for my property. Well, that's not true. You need to look at your contract. And,
right.
If certain things are not to order, perhaps it's actually on you to fix it. And the other thing is any sort of disputes that relate to real estate, whether it's a purchase contract that went wrong, perhaps two parties entered into a contract and then the seller refused to sell the property. That's another popular one for me.
Got it. Yeah, I think recently there was all this buzz about force majeure clauses, and a lot of people thought that, or they made the assumption that, that's of course in my lease, in my commercial lease.
Right.
I've seen so many more businesses than not have that in their lease at all. And because it's not, in North Carolina, I think we rely a lot on like the North Carolina bar forms as far as like, residential or commercial leases. It's not in the commercial lease. I mean, it just doesn't exist there unless you added it. And so I think you have this sort of across the board, just assumption that the contract does what you think it does, or of course it would include this sort of provision. But, probably one of the oldest, concepts in law is the buyer beware. I mean, you have to read your contract and you have to understand,
absolutely
that it has clauses, and those clauses control.
Yeah. And
what you're talking about, the people not really paying attention to the mail and whatnot, I think that's the sort of entrepreneur par for the course. A lot of people who run their own businesses are visionaries, are, the high level thinkers. They're not the day to day. And so it's, they're also probably not very deadline oriented or deadline motivated. So that's sort of the perfect recipe for, a default judgment or an entry default. Let's see. So why would a local business go with somebody like you, Anderson Legal, versus one of the bigger law firms in downtown Raleigh or a more traditional named firm?
Sure. So, I think something that's important, and it's no secret that it's important, is communication between a client and an attorney, right? That's really the sauce to the success of that relationship. And everybody has different styles of communication. And I think that element is amplified when you're dealing with small businesses. Certain small businesses, you're dealing with one person, that's the decision maker. He likes to talk over the phone. He likes to be very involved in decision making. Other small businesses, you've got 10 people. They're good if you post a status update once every 2 months, and they really just want you to run with it, take care of it, and they don't want to hear about it.
Yeah.
And so being the firm that I am, I have that flexibility to cater to my client's personality. I think that a lot of the larger firms have kind of a specific system that they need their clients to abide by, whereas I can cater it to your business and how you want to communicate, how you want things handled. If you want to be very involved in the decision making, I will take the time to inform you of everything. We'll discuss it, and then we'll move on with the strategy. If you want me to just handle it, of course, I will handle it, and I will send you all the documents that we have for your case, and I'll update you, but I'll run with it the way you want me to run with it. And so I think that I have that added flexibility that a lot of the larger firms do not.
Yeah, and of course, I think a piece specifically to you is that you've kind of got the makings of what we in law firm industry call a boutique, where you're sort of coming from a more bigger name type background, where you were trial by fire. You learned all the skills that you would necessarily have to know in that more name oriented traditional law firm business. And you basically have just taken all of the good, left all the bad, and created something that's unique and flexible. I think that's sort of an unheralded benefit of small law firms, is their ability to pivot and to be able to, modify their practices to best effectuate the outcome for their client. Versus, like you said, if you're sort of put in a box with every other client that has the same or similar matter to you, you're not going to get unique points of contact. You're not going to get unique treatment. And chances are you're going to be communicating mostly with a paralegal,
exactly.
Which is not super beneficial to you, right?
Right. Yep.
That's good to know. So now we're going to go to the hot seat portion, which is a little bit more fun, a little bit more deep dive into you and your personality.
Right.
So currently, obviously, a lot of people are spending a lot of time at home, jumping in on Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and all those great streaming platforms. What is a show that you're currently obsessed with?
So I just got started watching Ozark, and
Nice. Okay.
I have to say I'm really loving it. It's pretty dark, and I love how unexpected the twists and turns are. Just started season.
And there's 3 seasons?
Yes, there's 3 seasons, and I think they're working on season 4.
Wow.
So
plenty to get through.
Exactly. Yeah. Something to keep me occupied for a while.
Got it. Yeah, we've been watching Alone, which the 6th season is on Netflix, but it's basically like a survival show where these, trained, experienced survivalists are dropped off in the middle of nowhere, and often like in the winter or like coming up on the winter. And they've got to basically, it's last man standing or last woman standing. Whoever is the last to basically tap out wins $500,000. And there's 6 seasons. So the first 5 are on Hulu. The 6th is on Netflix. So basically at the end of the day, after the kids go to bed, that's what my wife and I have been, sort of zoning out to at the end of the day. If you generally outside of work, obviously you're spending a lot of time with your family, but if we could find you at any given weekend with a few hours on your hands, what are you doing for some me time?
So, my family and I, we are big into hiking, and now we've kind of had to downsize our hiking expectations, or maybe we're not going to the mountains. But we've really found some nice local lakes. And so we'll do a lot of walking around the greenways and lakes. And that's really the highlight lately of our weekends.
That's awesome. Any particular lake that's become your favorite?
I think we like Lake Pine because it's a nice 2-mile loop, and you know exactly where you are. And
there's a little playground out there. There's a little deck you can look at the fish and ducks and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. My son loves the dock there because every once in a while he sees a turtle or a fish or something. So
yeah, you can definitely see turtles out at Lake Pine. I feel like that's the mating grounds for turtles. They're everywhere.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
What is a book that you recommend the most?
So I think Becoming by Michelle Obama was honestly, not to sound corny, but it was kind of an experience for me. You know, not only is it interesting to see her side of the story of Obama becoming president and then his presidency, but also I think it's the kind of book that has a lot of wisdom. And I think that every reader kind of will have their own takeaway from it.
Sure.
And I actually read it right before I decided to leave my firm and start my law firm. And it was fairly pivotal in that decision. She emphasized that, yes, she's a career woman, but at the same time, she wanted to make sure that she can incorporate her career into her family's lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
And, I told myself, if that was Michelle Obama's priority, that's better be my priority too.
That's great. Yeah, my wife read that book too and loved it.
Mm-hmm.
What are you a podcast person?
I am. I love podcasts.
Awesome. What are the podcasts that you're currently listening to?
So my favorite is actually done by a friend of mine. It is called Fire Within Nutrition and Fitness. And he is a local personal trainer and nutrition specialist. And he's got various guests on, or sometimes he'll do a solo podcast, and it's just really good fitness and nutrition information. And it's pretty entertaining too.
Awesome.
I also like Freakonomics Radio.
Nice. That's a good one.
Yeah. A lot of times they kind of dive into the issues that I wouldn't have even thought of.
Yeah.
The question. So I like that one. And then recently I picked up Boss Babe Podcast, it's run by Boss Babe, which is a female-led business training group. And so they have a lot of female entrepreneurs on there, some male entrepreneurs also just kind of telling their story as to how they got started in business, and their goals and challenges and whatnot. So it's, I do see myself as an entrepreneur, and so that podcast is pretty pivotal in my day.
Feeds your need.
Exactly.
Motivation and that kind of thing. Great. So where can our listeners find you online?
So they can visit our website, www.andersonlegalnc.com. We also have a Facebook, Anderson Legal PLLC, and there you can chat with us. And those are our two main platforms online.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Alex. It's been a pleasure having you on our show today. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day. And again, Alex Anderson with Anderson Legal, focusing on small business litigation and construction matters. Thanks, everybody, for listening this week. It's episode 12 of the Planwell Podcast. This is Paul with Cary Estate Planning.
That's it for this week's episode. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share. We'll see you all next time.